So before we get this started, I was going to do a video on Wish Upon because I ended up watching it and it was terrible, but then I got really interested in the script that I had lying around about YouTube apologies, so I just ended up doing something on that. I hope you find this interesting, and the Wish Upon thing will come next week, I think. I hope so. I want to talk about this movie so fucking bad. Anyways, enjoy. So I've seen a number of videos, including that of Bobby Burns, and they kind of talk about the breakdown of YouTube apologies and how people manipulate it and stuff like that. I figured that I would just take a couple of those points and expand upon them. And anyway, Bobby Burns is like a SoundCloud rapper now, so if we're going to be dissecting a couple of apologies. I picked some of the most recent ones that I remember, like the Laura Lee one, Social Repose, and is it Jake or Logan Paul? I can never remember. Also, I don't care. I'm not going to really be going through what they did other than just for context because this isn't a drama channel or anything. I'm just going to be doing a sort of breakdown and commentary on the actual apologies themselves, looking at the visual cues, the sort of mindset and stuff like that. So I want you to think of a found footage movie now. I want you to think of Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch Remake, stuff like that. Basically what I'm trying to say here is there are millions of dollars of equipment and hiring people and all these professionals behind the scenes to try and make this thing look like there is no one behind the scenes. It's $1 million budget to try and make it look like a $10 budget or a $0 budget. That's basically what's going on here. There are so many things going on and it's meant to look like there is nothing else behind the scenes and this person's just being candid when they're not. So when we talk about the apology on YouTube, the first thing that you notice is the camera being put on or the camera being put off, and that's not edited out of the shot. I edited out when I actually set everything up here, but I would leave it in for the apology. So obviously they want you to think that they're being completely real with this. And it's all about bringing to mind what YouTubers in particular do, where you're aware that this is obviously an edited video and everything, but you kind of forget throughout the video because you're being absorbed in what's going on. You're this sort of character, whatever it is that they're doing. And when you strip everything away, it's meant to seem like they want you to see behind the scenes. They're stripping back any layer of manipulation. But let's talk about another reason why as well. This isn't necessarily something that they might consciously do, but it's something that's ingrained in us as human beings as well, which is a huge contributor to why this works. So it's specifically about leaving the middle of the video, the bit that you either remember the least, or it's the bit that sort of becomes really fuzzy and hazy in comparison to everything else. And the middle is the part where they usually apologize or pretend to apologize. It's crucial that your sort of attitude is other places. Now what I mean by this is, if I were to list off a couple things, you would actually be able to remember the first couple and the last couple the most. The middle was when it starts to get blurry. Now it takes some common sense to figure out why you're concentrating throughout the first and you haven't really gotten any other of the things stuck in your head yet. And in the last couple, they're the most recent, so they're easiest to kind of remember after that first view. The middle is where things start to get really blurry. You can even sort of have false memories as well. When I read the list back to you, I could put in a couple of things that weren't in the list and you wouldn't be able to tell. If you're concentrating on someone putting the camera on or off, you're remembering that sort of thing as the sort of distinct highlight from the video, and then when the middle comes in, it's usually just someone talking, and everything in that middle section of someone just saying all of these things starts to get a bit blurry. And with all that visual sort of manipulation as well, it really comes across as just, well, I'm sure they apologized, didn't they? I mean, at least they tried to say some sort of PR message, and you kind of forget what they actually said, but you're going to remember the very key things that stick out to you. So now that we talked about the end and beginning, let's talk about the middle itself, and let's go through the eyes and the face. Usually when YouTubers are talking to you just in a usual video, they want to maintain eye contact with you, except me because I'm socially retarded. But when you look at YouTube apologies, they're actually looking around or they're looking down. And one of the reasons that they're looking down is because they kind of want to show through their body language and the way that they look that they are thinking of themselves. They want you to think that they're recognizing themselves as below you or below. It's all about status here. Because usually a YouTuber is, even with their own ego, perceived as above you usually. I mean, they're this person with a huge following and you're the fan, so you're the one who's looking up to them. And even in their own ego, they're like, I am below you, you're the one who's relying on my content and stuff like that. Obviously not all YouTubers, just the ones that we're talking about today. And through that, they really want you to think that they're taking a huge ego hit because of this. Because not only are they kind of knocked down a peg from where the usual person is, but from above that as well, where they usually sit. So they're taking double the fall for you because they're recognizing like you're in the right, they're in the wrong, they're apologizing to you. And it's important to remember here that just because somebody's taking an ego hit doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same as recognizing their mistakes or being forgiven or wanting forgiveness for something that they recognize as wrong. This is another thing as well, mainly through language. They want you to think that somebody taking an ego hit or making you think that they've recognized that they've been taken down a peg is the equivalent to recognizing mistakes and just forgive them already. Can't you see how vulnerable they are? It's kind of portrayed as a sacrifice, like I'm sacrificing all of my filters and everything to try and be honest. And in a way that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of what people do on this platform. They have all these filters and edits, everybody does it, and to try and strip them away does show a certain level of candidness. I have nothing wrong with YouTube apologies in general. I mean, if you do something wrong and you recognize it's wrong, you should apologize. And I'm all about forgiveness and everything, but obviously there is a huge way that this can be just completely taken advantage of. You also see a lot of them kind of touching their face and their hair and like wiping their eyes even if there isn't necessarily tears there. I mean, part of that can be of stress obviously, or just being very self-aware because of the fact that there's not really many edits or anything on camera. That's perfectly fine. But in the context of stuff like this, there's particularly going to be a sort of presence on camera where they want to be of a slumped sort of posture, but still at the same time showing how stressed they are and everything. People who do sort of fake apologies are very hyper aware of that sort of thing. They want you to know how horrified they are because of what's happening and they really don't like it. They hate that they've been in this place when in reality they might have just been really agitated because they were caught in the first place. Again, I'm going to talk about that more in language, which is going to be towards the end of this, but there are so many visual signs to get through that it's kind of just that is going to take a while. And it's also usually them picking places that are lower in status visually behind them as well as themselves than where they were before. So they might be sitting on the ground, or they might be sitting somewhere that is devoid of decoration, or if someone's vlog is very active and has a lot of things going on at once, the light is oversaturated, everything like that. They might pick something that has very warm lighting or very low lighting to kind of indicate that there's nothing else going on to try and distract you from them. And this will kind of convey, this is serious, I know this is serious, so I'm not getting any excuses or distractions from my apology. When in reality it's just, again, to kind of make you think that they're trying to be more sincere about it. It's understandable to not have a bunch of lights and things going on or happy music when you're giving an apology, but it's so easy to just manipulate the way that this is done, especially when you have an army of 12-year-olds who are going to not look at any of the context or any of the words that you're actually saying and just look at the video and itself and how it's structured from a very, very superficial standpoint and easily forgive you from any excuse that you happen to make. That's another thing that a lot of these people have in common. Now, aside from avoiding the camera, looking down, wiping your eyes and closing your eyes, somebody who actually does look at the camera, they're going to look at the camera with wider eyes than usual because they usually have some form of tears, or their eyes are red, or there's some sort of stress going on in the face that kind of shows you how stressed they are and kind of shows you how real they're being. And it's sort of the same thing where YouTubers usually look in the camera because they want to connect with you. In this instance, it's just simply a different emotion. They want to really make you feel like they're staring at you to give you the apology as if it's somehow more sincere. And there's also the sort of sigh at the beginning of the video, them saying that they didn't want to make the video. A lot of the time they're very bad at explaining why they don't want to make the video, so instead of saying, I didn't want to make the video because I didn't want to ever get to the point where I would have to apologize for what I did because I didn't think I would do anything bad, they usually leave that part out so it makes it seem like they just didn't want to do an apology in the first place, which is kind of telling. And you also have to try and make your voice as, I guess, ugly as possible. I mean, through crying, through being stressed and having your throat kind of fucked up because of the fact that you're really just stressing over this apology. It's again sort of the audio version of what I was talking about before. You need to make yourself look more vulnerable with less filter instead of having time to make your voice sound pleasant. You're trying to show, I didn't even pause to try and clean myself up. My voice is just so fucking horrible because I've been crying all night and that's why it sounds like there's a constant vocal fry or it's really wobbly and you can barely understand what they're saying.
They were raw, they were unfiltered.
And you know, the funny thing is, we've ourselves been so ingrained in what a YouTube apology is supposed to be that when we actually get to the point of someone trying to do an edit, like let's pretend that Laura Lee actually has integrity for a second. So she was crying and then she made an edit there. So when you see something like that, everybody immediately gets angry and says, well, she's manipulating it. Now hang on a minute. When we're seeing a YouTube apology, we kind of think, oh well, they're manipulating us. But really, we've still taken it as something that is how an apology is supposed to be. For example, something that has less editing and stuff like that. Now, obviously it's understandable to want to have less editing in something that's supposed to be genuine, but we've kind of all taken it to a fault where, I mean, we're getting angry at something like this where she could easily just be cutting it because she cried so much that she couldn't speak, so she had to take a break and then come back, and she didn't want to film the entire break of her cleaning herself up. That could easily be something that was happening, but we want this big stream of consciousness sort of thing where there's no edits whatsoever, and that's something that appears more genuine. And that's really talking about the culture of where we are. I mean, it's the internet, so we have to try and make parameters for how to judge if something's real or not, and that really does get into a very complex area because you can interpret that edit as a lot of things, and the context is usually the way to go with this sort of thing. I mean, there are many other things in the apologies, like I was talking about before, with crying, wording, language, that really tell you whether it's false or not, but these isolated things really aren't that much of a clue. Because there's so many different things. It's one of the reasons why body language readings are such a difficult thing as well. And they're such a very complicated subject because somebody who's stressed could have the exact same signs as somebody who is feeling something else entirely because of the context of who they are. And you'd have to go through hours and hours of not only footage but other things as well, because you wouldn't actually be able to tell what's going on with them unless you know them. So YouTube apologies in themselves are in a very interesting sort of position where it's such a complex issue that we've been able to kind of tell, but at the same time we really don't know that much at all. As I mentioned before, you want to appear as if you are utterly powerless in this situation and the only thing you can do is be as genuine as possible. You can do this the easiest by pretending that you're taking everything away from yourself, be it the filters, the edits, the flashy stuff, the lighting. People will usually wear sort of simpler clothes now. Since I don't really wear makeup or do my hair or anything like that, I guess for me something like that would be having my hair up and in pajamas or something. Just anything that can try and make you feel, well, like somebody who has an avatar usually on screen like I actually do. It would be me appearing on camera or something like that. Stuff that shows that you're without the glitz, and that's somehow an indicator of being 100% genuine. It's gotten to the point where even if somebody is being genuine with that sort of stuff, so many people have used that technique to manipulate people that that person might not be believed too much anyway. I mean, for example, if you're a makeup channel, then you would put on barely any makeup, if any at all. You would probably have your hair up and away from your face. Or if you usually have a studio or something, you'll show the studio without any of the decorations on it, or you'll be sitting on your bed. You won't be having any of your fancy headdress shit on. The entire thing is highly edited damage control. So I guess really what we've been talking about is whether something is highly edited damage control or if it's an apology, because most of these are damage control. And this brings me to my bigger points: language and the manipulation of language. So as you can see with this one, we have kind of a few edits, but in this context we can say that it's either just her trying to adjust herself in a sort of optimized way. Now, because of her nails, you're kind of drawn to wherever they are because of the bright color, so she's constantly sort of dabbing her eyes and showing you that she's wiping away tears, and your eye is following that, so you're seeing how much she's upset, you're seeing how much she's crying. And then we have the edits where she is able to deliver her dialogue much better this way, because sometimes the ugly voice gets in the way of a lot of that stuff. And ultimately this is about language. The visual stuff is usually padding to try and make you believe the language stuff a lot more, but the language here is supposed to be as vague as possible as well. If you can try and get away with bending some details, like here she specifically says that she retweeted stuff. Now, I don't really care about the whole makeup community thing, but I do know that she actually typed out those tweets herself, and those are her own words that she's trying to act like they aren't. So the entire thing with the language is about distancing someone from their mistakes. And we also have the idea of her hair being out of her face, which kind of shows you that she's trying to bear all, like she's not hiding behind her hair. She's showing you her tears, so she's showing you how much it's upsetting her. And then when we move on to someone like whichever Paul this is, so we move on to an apology like this where his eyes are open and he's showing you his tears because he is more in focus than she is in terms of where he's placed. You can clearly see what's going on here, and he doesn't actually have to bring you attention to his eyes because he's constantly looking at the camera, whereas she was looking all around the place. And his eyes are much bigger as well. He's constantly looking at the camera because he wants you to think that he's connecting with you, and the lighting is very low, not only because there's nothing behind him to really see and there's no distraction there, but also because he is much more in focus this way as well, so you have to concentrate on him And the attention, in this case, if you watch someone who's looking you in the eye the entire time that they're recording, it starts to get a bit uncomfortable as well. So you start kind of fidgeting and feeling a bit on the same level as well, so you can kind of empathize. It also, in a way, distracts you as well. And since you're not being distracted by the stuff behind him, you kind of start getting distracted by him staring at you the entire time, so that also distracts you from the way that he's wording things a bit too vague. And in the last one, this one's more about the language itself, and it would be too long to kind of go through all of it, but to go into a bit of context. This sort of apology is an interesting one because it's mainly about trying to distance or show your own story. And that in itself is fine. There are many things where someone shouldn't take the entirety of the blame. They should explain themselves and should defend themselves, but these two things should be done in not the same video, or at least not the same section of the same video. The apology needs to be done. It needs to be really actually set in. People need to know that this is an apology and you need to apologize for what you're doing, and it's in every way without trying to make the apology look like a less of a big deal, and then afterwards you need to come with your explanation. It's really important that you let these two things be their own thing and not try and interfere with the impact of the other. So in this one, he's apologizing, but at the same time, every time he says a word about apologizing, he'll say an entire sentence about how it's really the other person's fault. So in this instance, the entire purpose of the structure of this is just to make the apology seem as really as minor as possible, so the fault seems as minor as possible as well. I mean, he doesn't have to apologize that much because it's really the other person's fault the entire time. There's also a bunch of other stuff as well, like deleting comments and just basically trying to minimize the damage as much as possible in an entirely different way that doesn't really involve crying or showing as much visceral emotion as that exaggerated emotion as possible, but really you get the idea. So when we get to language itself, it's important that you say the words "I'm sorry," but you don't actually apologize. I mean, of course you should apologize, but I mean, if you're trying not to apologize. Again, this has to do with a fan looking up to a YouTuber, the whole status thing, like high status, low status. You want them to think that you're lowering your status for them, but at the same time, you don't want to break that perception of perfection that they have of you, because that's how they look up to you. And at least in these circumstances, it's where they want to see you as invulnerable, but at the same time you need to be vulnerable for the apology. You need to maintain both of those things at once. So you use the visuals and the way that you use your voice to try and make them think that you're being vulnerable, but at the same time, the actual way that you're phrasing your apology leaves that invulnerability because you're not really admitting faults, but you're giving them the feeling that you are. So really it's about how satisfied you're making the viewer feel. If they feel like that's enough of an apology because of the emotions that the other things have given them, that's totally fine, because they don't actually need to admit fault. But if you're not apologizing, what do you say? I'm sorry, pause, big fucking pause, that you were upset, that you were offended, that you saw what I did, that I made a mistake, that I did the thing, whatever it is, in front of you, that I've made mistakes and I shouldn't have. The entire thing is either vague, or you're basically saying that you're sorry that you were caught and that people actually got angry at what you did because what you did was either not a big deal or it was to serve you, so therefore it was okay. And that is really the simplest part of the manipulation, because you have to figure out how to make yourself look vulnerable through visual means. You have to lower your status by sitting on the floor, you have to try and make your body language look a certain way, you have to show your stress in a context that it's stress because of the fact that you're ashamed of yourself rather than stress that you're in a controversy and you want to get out of it so you can go back to making money. The easiest part is just being as vague as possible. It's really just writing a couple sentences down or having your PR team do it so it makes it look like you're doing it. And again, you want to make the audience feel like you actually give a shit. You want to say I'm sorry so that the context of the visual unsaid things as well will give them the feeling that they're satisfied, and then you can follow it up with as many vague sentences as you want. That I made you upset, that you were offended, that I did what I didn't want to make a mistake, and then you usually follow it up with some sort of story about how you got to the platform and stuff like that. Again, not inherently bad to explain how you got to the platform, because you can kind of explain like you got overwhelmed and you did something wrong or whatever, but in this context it's usually to try and give you a sense of nostalgia, or the fans a sense of nostalgia, or a sense of showing how human you are when at the same time being invulnerable because you're a YouTuber. So I usually say something like, when I first started I still feel like the girl in my bedroom with 100 subscribers. I still feel like blah blah blah. I'm so happy that I got this opportunity from you. I never thought that I would be doing something like this. I never thought everybody makes mistakes, blah blah blah. And really, that's all you need to do. That's your checklist for being as disingenuous as possible. I hope this brought something new to the table. I hope that it was at least kind of entertaining, interesting to watch. It was kind of a pain watching through all of these apologies and writing stuff down, so I'm glad that I at least had what I had to say. And if you're ever in a controversy, please actually apologize and don't do stuff like this. I basically did a how-to guide deconstructing the stuff. I hope no one actually uses it. And now that I've done this interesting subject, I can actually get back to wanting to kill myself by watching Wish Upon. I also ended up watching some weird Instagram comedy because I was working on a video on how comedy works and why Instagram comedy isn't funny. So I'm not sure when that's coming up, but that is something to look forward to. And you can also tell me some specific things that you don't like about Instagram comedy that I can touch on in the video for you if you'd like. And if you haven't seen Wish Upon, like, everyone's reviewing it right now. It's fucking terrible. I didn't think it was that terrible, and then I watched it myself. And I kind of want to die just a little bit.